couldn't hear you, and I just didn't even bother to post that one because that was pretty bad. So, all right, moving on here. Are there any questions about why it's 1/3? That's such a good question. I'm glad you stumped me a little bit on that one. So that was good. I feel like we got it. Anybody have any other questions? Wes, did you feel like it made sense now? Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and just glance at questions 10 through 12. And many of you have already done this, so this is just reviewing. I don't want my answer key. I want the version that I did. When I saw that people were struggling, I wrote on the original. My computer is completely going goofy on me. Give me just a second. I don't know what's happening. I noticed that you guys were struggling a little bit, so I wanted to show you how you come up with your expected levels. So I wrote directly on the assignment. Hurry up. This one right here. So I wrote directly on the assignment to kind of explain how we come up with the expected levels. This is a question that will be on your FRQ. You have to be able to calculate chi-squared and to be able to make some predictions on your FRQ. So this is a question that is hard, and we need to make sure you're feeling comfortable about it. Comfortable with it. Where did I put it? Did I go too far now? There we go. So I wrote on this. So some of you that did the assignment early didn't see this. I've since added it. So it says, look at page 12 for tips on how to calculate expected values. So these are the values. These are the observed. And so they all go right here, and you just write them down right there. But the question is, what are the expected, and how do you calculate that? So there were 224 children. I'm showing you that right there. There were 224 children. So how do you calculate what are going to be type A with normal red blood cells? And so we go to the last page, and then I wrote this down. So we need to know the odds of being a certain blood type, and we need to know the odds of having sickle cell anemia. So you can multiply those odds together. So the first thing I did is I did the Punnett square, and I calculated the odds of the offspring being type A was 3/4, and the odds of the offspring being type O was 1/4. Then I calculated the odds of them having sickle cell or being a carrier, so having sickle trait, or being homozygous dominant. And I calculated all that. And then for each row, I multiply it together. So for example, the first group of offspring, it said, it basically is saying, what are the odds that they will be type A and have normal red blood cells, which means homozygous dominant for sickle cell anemia. So I went to type A, it's 3/4. So I wrote down 3/4. Then I multiply it by the odds of being normal red blood cells, which is big A. So I multiplied that by 1/4, and I got 3/16 or 0.1875. Now that's the ratio or the percentage if I moved it over 18%. But the question is, out of 224 children, how many is that? And I just take that number and multiply it by 224, and I find out that we would expect 42 children to be type A with normal red blood cells. And then I just keep going from there. So let me go back where I was. So the phenotype, the first one was type A normal red blood cells. So you put it there. The observed was 48. That's what they had there. And the expected we calculated was 42. So then we go back. I'll do one more just to make sure you're feeling comfortable. Type O, normal red blood cells. So let's go back down here and take a look. Type O blood was 1/4. Normal red blood cells was 1/4. So 1/4 times 1/4 is 1/16. So whatever that calculates into decimals, I can't do it on the top of my head. And then multiply that by times 224. And that will tell you the expected, I almost said observed, the expected number of kids. And then we want to see if something is going on, if this fits the null hypothesis. So another thing that I will mention that they do slightly differently, unfortunately, and I'm sure that was confusing for you, instead of saying this is the p-value that we use, is the chi-square higher or lower? Instead of doing that, they said, what is the p-value with the chi-squared that you got? So you can do it my way because my way is the way that they do it on the AP exam. So you can say our degrees of freedom in that instance, let me go back. The degrees of freedom for that one was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 minus 1. So there were 5 degrees of freedom. And so the way that I have taught you to do it is to go 5 degrees of freedom. We go across on this data table, whoops, to the 0.05 level. So this is the 0.05 column. So your p-value that you're using as your critical value was 11.07. And you need to decide, is your chi-square above that or your chi-square below that? They do it slightly differently on this. It's completely legitimate. It's just a different way than the way that I taught you. So just be aware of that. The last thing I'll mention for question 12, this one right here, they asked you to come up with your own data. And so when you wrote down exactly what the answer key had, that wasn't really showing that you understood being able to predict what you would see observed, because you are rejecting the null hypothesis in this one. So you've got to show that you would reject the null hypothesis in this one. And some people didn't do that, but okay. How are we doing on that? For sure, there will be a genetics chi-squared, absolutely 100% on the FRQ that you will need to be able to do. So if you still feel like you have questions, I'm going to move on to the pedigrees. But if you still feel like you have questions, then we want to talk about that. I have office hours tomorrow morning, and then I also have review session tomorrow after school. And then I would almost certainly go over this after school tomorrow too. Okay, next, I'm going to move on to the pedigrees, and I'm going to stop presenting from this. And I'm going to try to not screw it up this time. I'm going to present from my Chromebook this time. We don't need that, but I can still see all of you. So I'm going to present my screen. And on today's page, on the heredity page, I gave you a link to where I got these pedigrees from, and they explain everything that I'm going to explain, but please don't go to it. Like for right now, the only reason I gave you the link was so that you could review it after you've gone through it with me one time. I just want you to be solving these with me and not already knowing the answers, if that made sense. Okay, so let me go ahead and... Is this the first one? Yep, this is the first one. Okay, so I have confidence that you know how to look at a pedigree and interpret it if they tell you this is a dominant pedigree, or this is a sex-linked recessive pedigree, or this is a recessive pedigree. I'm not convinced that everybody knows how to look at it and figure it out. I will tell you right away that sometimes you can't tell. So when you look at the pedigree, it could be one or another or even another. They chose some good pedigrees, and so that's why I'm using this particular set of notes that are pretty clear. So I want to show you kind of how to solve these kinds of pedigrees. The first thing that I notice, these are just rules of thumb. The first thing that I notice is that we have a girl and a boy. Usually with sex-linked recessive, the boys have it more often. So you will either see 0 girls or only 1 girl and several boys affected. Right now I see a male and a female. So I'm assuming probably not sex-linked, but it's in the back of my mind. Another thing that I notice with dominant is that they often go every single generation. So you will see all of the generations having it, whereas the recessives often skip a generation. So notice that the middle generation doesn't have anybody there. But then I'm going to play with it a little bit. So this is maybe something that if you're going to take notes or write down, something that they recommend in the slideshow where I got this, and I thought it was really good. If you have kids that have it, but their parents don't, then it's probably recessive. So notice that we have a boy here. We don't know anything about this. We don't know anything about her parents. So we can't we can't figure it from her. But we do see that the boy, right here has it and his parents don't. So if it was a dominant trait, they have to have it, or at least one of the parents has to have it in order to pass it on to him. So we would see that the parent was colored in. So that implies that this is a recessive. So let me give you some examples. Let's choose the letter, and this is what they do in the thing. Let's choose the letters R and R. Big R for red and little r for they don't have it. They have the red trait, whatever the red trait is, who cares? So in this case, if it's recessive, we would say that this boy is little r, little r. Let's double check to make sure that really works for everybody. So if he's little r, he must have had one parent that's big R, little r. I know it's big R because they're normal. They don't have the red trait, but they must have given a little r to their son. The other female, the mom, must also be big R, little r. If this is recessive, she gave her little r to her son, but she has a dominant R that makes her normal. Now so far that totally works. Let's take a look and see if it works up here also. In my theory, then this person should be little r, little r. This one is big R, oh, and then it's a blank. We don't know what the dad is. The dad could be a carrier or the dad could be homozygous normal. So homozygous dominant, we don't know. Could they produce all kids that are normal? And the answer is they could. You would expect that if he was big R, little r, you would expect that, oops, did that wrong. You would expect that 50% of their kids would be red. But that's just probability, you guys. That doesn't mean 100% that 50% of their kids would be red. It's just the odds here. So is it possible that he is a carrier and they still had all kids that were normal? For sure it is. And that's all I need is just to know if it's possible that it happened. And it is. And these guys could be all big R, little r. And that's why they're normal, but they got one little r from their mom. Does anybody have any questions about the things that I've been saying so far? I'm gonna erase this and then just play with really quickly. What if this was a dominant trait? Could we tell if it was a dominant trait? What would it look like? So in order for this to be a dominant trait, they have to have one or even two copies of the trait. So this individual would have to be at the very least big R, little r, and big R is the dominant trait, or they would have to be big R, big R. So where did they get their big R from? Well, it would have had to have been from the parents, but if it's a dominant trait, neither of the parents have it. The parents would both be little r, so it is not possible. This cannot be a dominant trait. That is not possible. Dominant is not possible. And let's just glance really quickly. Is it possible that this is a sex-linked trait? So give me a second here. Let's see if it could be a sex-linked trait. Well, I see the boy. It definitely could be sex-linked for the boy. What about the female? Let's take a look at her and see why this cannot be a sex-linked trait. So the female would be listed as this. She would be X little n, X little n. That's the only way for a female to have that recessive trait is if she got two of them. Now that means that she always gives her X little n to her offspring. So her females could be, her daughters could be this. They got their big N from dad. So they could be carriers, and that totally works. But what did their boys, you don't need to answer it, but in your head, what did their boys get from their dad, and what did their boys get from her if it's sex-linked? Thinking in your head. Dad is, in this case, this dad is, oops, sorry, X big N Y. He's normal, and it's not carried on the Y chromosome. What time do we get out of here? I still have time. Okay, so he always gives his Y chromosome to his boys, always. That's what makes them boys. So that Y chromosome went there and that Y chromosome went here. So if these boys are normal, it's impossible because mom would have had to give them a little n. And they're normal, so she didn't give them a little n. So my point being, this can't be a sex-linked recessive pedigree. Did I explain that in a way that made any sense? Do you feel like I'm kind of following that? We're going to try a handful of others, and we'll see if that starts to make sense. Shout out if you've got a question like, nope, I didn't follow that logic. And then we'll try a bunch more, and hopefully the logic will start making more sense. Okay, I'm going to
go. Just be a regular, because it's not sex-linked, it would just, what would it be called? Just a regular.
Just call it recessive. We just say the inheritance pattern is recessive. Okay, so I'm going to erase this really quickly because I have to do this with my second block class too. So I got to make sure it's all cleared off for them. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So what pattern of inheritance does this follow? So in your brain, there should be two things that you're asking right away. The first question I think you should ask right away is look at the sexes. So is this likely to be sex-linked when we've got 6 girls and 2 boys? The answer is no. That makes it very unlikely. And especially when you're in a hurry, if you see something like that, you just cross it off the possibilities. No, it's not a sex-linked trait if you see that many biological females having this disorder. I don't know if it's a disorder, but whatever, this trait. So then that leaves us with dominant or recessive. And by the way, those are the only 3. You're only going to be dealing with dominant, recessive, or sex-linked. Maybe they would do sex-linked dominant, in which case a lot of females, that increases the odds that the females could get it. I don't know that I've ever seen a question about sex-linked dominant before. So just, have that in the back of your mind that it's a possibility, but probably not. All right, so when I look at this, the thing that I really do notice is that we didn't skip a generation. I see that the middle generation has individuals that are affected. And so if we look at one of the things that you might want to write down is that with autosomal dominant, then the parents have it, but a kid might not have it. So if the parents have it, it's possible to have a kid that doesn't have it. And I'll give you an example, a really quick example, because we already did this one. This is a totally different example, but remember we talked about achondroplasia dwarfism? So both of these parents have the dominant achondroplasia trait, but it is possible for them to have a full height child. So that's a dominant example. So what stands out in this pedigree? In your head, be like, there is somebody that's in particular that really is a problem that it couldn't be recessive. Can you see the one person that it absolutely shows you that this cannot be a recessive trait? Can you find the one individual that this cannot be a recessive trait? Anybody want to try it? Let me break it down for you. I'm going to use the letter R again. Let's pretend it is not. Let's pretend that this is recessive. So if it's recessive, this individual is little r, little r, little r, little r, little r, little r. This guy's big R something. The parents are little r, little r, little r, little r, big R something, big R something, little r, big R something. Who's the problem now? Do you have any idea? Who sticks out? Who is like, nope, that is not possible?
The children in the 3rd generation who don't have the condition.
That is correct, because their parents only have recessive. If this is recessive, those parents only have recessive genes to pass on. So everybody should be colored in, but they have some kids that have it. So when you have parents that have it and then you have a child that doesn't, that's a hint. I also pay attention to when all the when every single generation has it. That's also a hint, but not 100%. It's a hint. Okay, so now let's erase what I have here and look at it one more time. And we kind of crossed off the sex link, so I'm not going to do that one with you. But let's look at it if it's dominant. So if it's dominant, this guy needs to have at least one capital R, and then it doesn't matter what the second letter is. And this one needs to have at least one capital R, and it doesn't matter what that is. Is it possible for them to have a normal child that is little r, little r? And the answer is yes. This parent could be this, and this parent could be that, and then they could have children that are little r, little r. Then all the rest of the children could be big R, or big R, little r, and we don't know. Any questions about why that's dominant? Okay, I'm going to erase and we'll move on. I'm going to try to just get us done as fast as possible. Make sure that you check to see what your homework is. I think the homework is the summaries and starting to study for the test. All right, this one is tricky. This one is tricky because I see that it's in every single generation, which kind of makes it seem like it's dominant. Is it? Let's try it. So let's try, are there any times when both parents have it that their kids don't all have it? Well, no. Both parents have it, their kids, wow, that's a big family. Their kids all have it. So let's try this couple here. Let's say it's big R, little r, and little r, little r. If this is a dominant trait, is it possible to have this child? Yep, it sure is. So the answer is this could be dominant, but we're not done. Could this be sex-linked recessive? And the answer is no, it could not be sex-linked recessive. And let's prove why it couldn't be sex-linked recessive with the same individuals here. So this male would be X big N Y because he's normal, and the female is X little n, X little n. Could they have a daughter that is X little n, if dad is X big N? No. So this is not sex-linked. So we know that it is not a sex-linked trait. Now let's check and see if it could actually be a recessive trait. It's a fairly rare example because recessive traits are usually less common, but not always. So let's take a look. Could it be recessive? So let's just, let's choose this family over here. If it's recessive, oh, right, that would mean all of their kids would be little r, and same thing here. They'd all be little r, so all of their kids would be little r. Okay, so that so far makes sense. Let's take a look at the other family. This mom would be little r. This dad would be big R something. Is it possible for them to have a child that is big R, little r? It sure is. Is it possible for them to have a child that is little r? It is if dad's hidden trait is a little r. Then they could have gotten a little r from mom and a little r from dad. So this can be dominant or recessive. That pedigree is both. All right, moving on. I should erase it, but I'm running out of time. What pattern of inheritance does this trait follow? By the way, I'm not entirely certain why they put the line through number 4. It varies from pedigree maker to pedigree maker, but sometimes the line through it means that they have passed away. So I'm going to assume that that's what they're saying there, is that number 4 is dead, but all the others are living. Often when you see a pedigree like this, lots of people are dead because it's many generations that you're looking at, but what stands out? Somebody jump on. What should you notice right off the bat?
The
That
first
five-
generation doesn't have any.
The second generation doesn't have any. Is that what you said, Alejandro?
Yeah, my bad. Yeah.
For sure. The second generation. So this group right here doesn't have any. And then somebody else spoke also. What else do you notice?
I was gonna say that 5 and 6 had kids, and then the kids had the trait showing.
Okay, so we're saying that that's recessive. We've got clear evidence that this is recessive. But what was actually the question that I said maybe you should say first in your head? What's the first thing you should ask yourself when you look at these?
Sex linked.
Sex. What do you notice, Alejandro?
That all the people that have the trait are male.
Male. So when I'm trying to hurry, the first thing I want to look at really quick, are we talking about males or females at this point? We're talking entirely males. I'm going to jump right to, instead of trying dominant, instead of trying autosomal recessive, I'm going to jump right to sex-linked recessive and see if that could be a possibility. And the answer is yes, it absolutely could be a possibility. This dad is X little n Y. The mom would be X big N X something. We don't know her second trait. They would have all normal children. This girl always gets dad's X. So this female would be X little n X something. We don't know what her second letter is, and it doesn't matter, because then she passed it on to her kids, which are X little n, her boys, which are X little n Y then. This was an X. It looks like a Y, doesn't it? Sorry. It's annoying that X's and Y's, when you're being sloppy, look a lot alike. It's a weird thing, but anyway. Okay, and then you could also take a look and decide, okay, could this be dominant? Could this be just autosomal recessive? And the answer is no, it could not be. I don't think it could be either. I don't think it could be plain recessive. Give me just a second. Could it be plain recessive? Give me just a moment. Recessive. Maybe it could be plain recessive. Does anybody see a reason why it couldn't be autosomal recessive? I think it can be.
Wouldn't if it was recessive, 5 and 6 would all have little r's, so then all of them would
Let's
be
try it.
white.
Let's try it. So no, because if it's recessive, 5 and 6 would be, oh my gosh, sorry. 5 and 6 would be little r.
Yeah, I see that now.
Does anybody see any way that this would not work? Big R something. I think that this one could be sex linked, or it could be recessive, just plain old. So we call that autosomal recessive. It means that it's not on the sex chromosome. So all the other chromosomes, they're called autosomes. So that would be, it could be either sex-linked recessive or autosomal recessive. All right, how am I doing time-wise? Oh my gosh, it's time to go. I didn't realize that. Okay, you guys, have a good rest of your day. Take a look at what the homework is for tonight. Peace.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
For the test, would you recommend like counting and saying like 3 out of 4 and then like